Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Sound Of series, and today we're going to be looking at Talos. In episodes 1 and 2 we looked at Jon Bellion and 21 Pilots, so check those out if you haven't already, but today we're going to be looking at an Irish musician called Talos. His real name's Eoin French, and he's relatively new to the music scene, but he's been releasing the most outstanding quality of music from the vocal production to the actual songs production themselves and also the lyrics. Before we get started, I'm just going to give some audio demos of the sort of thing we're going to be creating. As usual, I'll be giving away all the synth presets, all the drum samples and whatnot, but because this video is going to be pretty long, I'm just going to start by showing the sounds we're going to create. I'm going to be recreating parts from 2 of his songs. So here you go.
Set a fire to the moon shade. We are just shadows in the cascades of history. Faded love and they all. I know they'll never find us. We had a mix of madness and I feel free in time. Full depths with me, miles apart. In light, we solve a whole life. The weight of the world feels, the weight of the world, it feels heartless. Forever we fade out. Only in my whole life, the silence where I stood, I found you in the moonlight. Never knew it felt this good. Won't you teach me how to see the way you see
It's just the most gorgeous stuff. It's definitely sort of indie electronic. There's huge electronic influences, almost sort of like a post-rock influence as well. Chillingly cold atmospheres, glorious, just beautiful vocals sitting there as well, and the production around it is just astonishing. So we're going to be looking at the guitar. So I'm going to show you sort of how to get the guitar tones, how to record it. Also going to be showing you how to play it on guitar, so the actual chords themselves. Also going to show you how to play it on piano or on a synthesizer, keys. And I'm going to be diving deep into the production for the synthesizers, giving away all the Serum presets. I'm also going to be diving a little bit deeper into the drum programming, of course giving you the samples as well. And there's going to be loads and loads of timestamps in the description and in the comments section. I can appreciate that people might not watch this all in one go, so if you want to come back to it, you know where you left off. Anyway, that's enough talking, so let's just get on with the video, but I do hope that you check out his work. It's all linked in the description down below. It really is very, very beautiful. So let's start with the first song, which is going to be In Time. I haven't recreated the whole song, but I've got the introduction and verse sort of going into the pre-chorus and then the first time round through the chorus. And the thing that I really want to show here is how the song manages to be incredibly simple and simplistic, but it still gets across all of the emotion, and it's really got everything it needs in it. It's a real lesson in simplicity. So let's just take a listen to the start. So the song starts with some guitar, this pulse, and sort of like a smooth pad. So I'll play it together and then I'll break down all the parts.
Set a fire to the moon shade. We are just shadows in the cascades of history. Faded love and they all games.
So that's the idea of what's going on in the verse here. It's relatively minimalistic, but it still sounds really full and thick. So it's comprised of a guitar part, which sounds like this. Really sort of phasey and interesting. I'll go into all of those effects in a moment. There's this hiss, which could have been inside the guitar track, but I added later. And you can see that it just rises up in between those guitar chords. And it really adds a lot of personality. There's a really smooth pad that just sits and fills all the gaps between everything. And then there's also this really interesting pulse that just keeps time and really helps you, well, sort of keep time with the song, know when the next chord is coming and whatnot. So it sounds like this. I'll make it a bit louder. And in headphones, you'll notice that bouncing backwards and forwards. I'll go into all the sound design in a minute, but I'm just going to grab my guitar, reposition the camera, and show you how this guitar was recorded, what chords were used, and how it was played. So I have here my PRS SE Custom 24, and I have a tuner on the top to make sure that I'm staying nice and in tune for these takes. I'm putting this straight into the DI of my Audient ID44, so there's no reverb, there's no cabinet or amp or anything. It's just the raw tone, just like this. In the verse, there's 3 chords: A sharp minor, G sharp major, F sharp major. That's all there is for the verse. It's just those 3 chords, just that descending pattern. So we're playing normal bar chords, but we're not playing the whole chord. We're not using all the strings like that. We're just using 3. So if I zoom in here, on each chord, we're only using the E string, A string, and G string. I use my fingers and sort of finger pick like this. And it's a really beautiful way to voice those chords because we're not filling up the whole frequency spectrum. It's still quite full-bodied, but there's loads of room for those synths, the atmospheres, and more importantly, his vocal to sit on top of that without clashing too much. In the chorus, there's one more chord added up here, which is a C sharp major. So I'll just play the sort of chorus. That's the C sharp major. Back down to the start. So that gives a bit of variety between the verse and the chorus. It kind of makes the chorus lift a little bit more at the end before resolving. Now, when it comes to the tone, most guitars, if not all guitars, have various ways of selecting different tones here. So I've got a tone control as well as a volume control. I can change from humbucking to single coils, and I can choose my pickup position. So let's now experiment with some different tones. I can make it darker. Brighter. Choose a pickup position. And then I can also put it into single coils where I lose a lot of the bass. And getting the right tone at the start before you hit it with EQ and compression and before you start mixing it in is really important. Tone's got to come from the fingers and then what you select on the guitar. And it was clear that they picked the take with the right emotion and the right tone at the start. It might not have been the cleanest take or the best take, but when the song starts, you're immediately taken into the right headspace for the song. It's so emotional, it's so impactful just from the first couple of notes that are played. You know, they definitely picked the one with the right emotion, and that's something to remember and take away from this. So let's go to the guitar processing. Now that we're back, let's look at the guitar processing. So I'm going to go to my mixer over here. I'm going to turn off all the processing and change the stereo width back to normal again. So let's just listen to it raw. And what I felt it needed was just a lot more character, kind of more width, more phasiness, kind of just make it sound really interesting. It doesn't have to sound perfect or proper. It just had to sound a lot more of a vibe, to be honest. The first thing I did was just a general cleaning up, a little bit of low end because I forgot to put my high pass on when I recorded it. So I just took the low end out, kept all those low mids. Usually I would remove them, but the song was really, really thick and full. And if you listen, my guitar strings sound a bit dead. I do need to replace them, so the tone is very, very dark. So I've just boosted the high end a little bit, just to try and pull out something a little bit interesting. Not much, but my strings were a little bit dead there. So nothing crazy going on there. Next thing was a limiter. You'll see what it does, but really just listen with your ears. And it makes sure that on this really big stab here, it doesn't sort of go overboard, because you can see my playing wasn't very consistent. That just means that it never really jumps out in front of the vocal too much. The next 3 things in the chain is a chorus, a delay, and a phaser, and this is just to add all of that vibe. So I've got the chorus up here. If you want to copy the settings, they're right here, but I just sort of turned a couple of dials until it sounded interesting like this. The next thing was the repeater. And what this is a delay, but you could do this with any delay, but this one sounds like really colored and interesting. And what I'm using this to do is to create a very, very sort of short reverb kind of sound. I noticed the guitar didn't have what appeared to be a reverb on it. But if I turn this delay completely wet, it's like a really short delay reverb. So I've just pulled back the mix a lot actually, to maybe like 20 or 30%. And it gives it this dimension without just adding a really huge decay tail on it. If I were to add a regular reverb like I normally would, increase the decay. I mean, it sounds luscious and beautiful to me, but that is not what they did in the track. The next step is a phaser. Again, I've got some settings here, but I'm not actually used to this plugin, so I just turned a couple of dials until it sounded interesting, and it started sounding really, it had this sort of wrongness and just quality to it that was awesome. Let's do a before and after with all three of those effects. So before. Now what I noticed was that it seemed to, the actual guitar they had still felt mono, but it had this weird phasiness to it that was just interesting and wrong. So what I did was something I would usually never do. I got an imager and I pushed everything to the max. This is just Ozone imager, pretty much everything to the max. So it gives it this really phasy, super wide sound. And then I noticed that in the Talos track in time, it doesn't actually feel that wide in the track. So I just made it a little bit more mono on the mixer here, and we end up with this really interesting guitar tone where it feels really wide and phasy, but it's not actually wide. It's interesting. I felt that was a pretty good bed to start the track from. And then I noticed that in their track, whether it was baked into the guitar recording, like a really hissy guitar, or whether it was added artistically like this, they had this hiss, this kind of white static noise rises up at the end of each chord, just like this. And it adds just so much character to the recording, it makes you sort of connect with it a little bit better. A white noise sort of hiss track, I'll include that in the description as well. Now let's look at the sound designs. For the pad that I showed you a few minutes ago, I just used Serum. I use Serum all the time. I just find it to be a really easy synth for me, and I got it on the sort of pay monthly thing, which was super easy for me. Smooth Chords preset, I'll include that in the description with that pack. It's just a sine wave, couple of voices of unison, really soft attack, soft decay. It doesn't jump out at you, it just fills all those spaces. If you download it, you can see exactly what I've done here. Nothing special, nothing complicated. And the last thing in this verse is this pulse. I will just turn it up here. Sounds like this. And you can hear it dotting between the headphones. The presets in the description is another sine wave, just with a kind of faster attack, fast decay, so that it jumps up and down. It can actually be a really nice bass. Wow. But it's just good for high-end arpeggios as well. That kind of stuff. And in this case, it's just playing one note. It pans from left to right. So as well as having some reverb on there, I've got this balance plugin. And this automation clip is just going from left to right, to left to right. Just like that, it just gives so much movement. I have another automation clip which just starts the volume low and slowly rises it throughout a phrase. And the effect is a little bit like this.
Faded love in your games, a sky release. I said our bodies and my love.
Really subtle, but it does make the track move. It helps you stay in time with the whole track. That was actually unironic, that's really bad. What I want to talk about next is how the track starts moving. So we've had this not for too long. It hasn't been too long. It's only been a couple of bars. The track needs to evolve somehow. And this sort of really chilling bass comes in. So it's just a sub bass. It's pretty clean. I'll show you the preset here. Again, preset in the description. Just sine wave, one voice of unison. It's really simple sub, nothing going on with it. Usually I distort these, so I was experimenting with this saturator plugin. Kind of adds a little bit of high harmonics, maybe helps you hear it, but then I also use an EQ just to cut away some of those harmonics. So, it just has to be a really solid sub wave sitting underneath the track. So it sounds a bit like this, and it's accented with this really soft kick drum, which I'll go into more in a minute.
I said our bodies and my lungs, sure. This heavy whisper makes me more scared than anything.
And I should say as well, the verse chords here are the same chords that the guitar is playing, and then the sub just plays the lowest notes of those chords, same as with the guitar, A sharp, G sharp, F. It just highlights it just like that. And I think when he says, you know, more scared than anything, if you listen to the lyrics, it's like this sub, it really, you know, if you're listening on a good sort of hi-fi system or a car, it just rattles and shakes, you know, your chest and your back, and it just gets that emotion of the song through all the way through to your core now. All this stuff before here, this is like ear candy. It's getting you in the right headspace. It's all atmospheric and beautiful, and the vocal is just gorgeous. But this is the bit where the song is saying, yeah, we're getting serious now. Kick that bass in.
This heavy whisper makes me more scared than anything. I was loved and now that love's lost. I know they'll never.
And this kick underneath is just getting us ready for the kick pattern that's going to come in the chorus. And when the chorus kicks in, it is absolutely gorgeous. So let's just take a listen.
Sway out amongst the madness as I feel free in time. Full depths with me, miles apart in light. We solve a whole.
But looking at the overall tonal balance of it, so I use this tool called tonal balance, is that the track is far bassier than it should be. When they were recording it and mixing it, they clearly went for the sound they wanted and not the sound that was necessarily commercial. I'm running the original track through this, but I've muted it for copyright purposes, and you can see that even on the bass heavy preset, definitely on the modern, the sub is kicking way too far. We're lacking sort of high mids, and no one cares because it sounds absolutely perfect just the way it is. No one is like worried about that. They weren't worried about it. You know, it could have been clearer, it could have been brighter, more commercial sounding, but I don't think it could have been any more emotional and hard-hitting than it was with that really big sub that kicks in. So the sub is the same as the one in the verse. I've just got a little bit more volume out of it. And then we have this drum pattern, which is a really soft kick drum, and then a snare drum that's probably a lot more dry than you'd think it is. So let's take a look at this. Running into the chorus, we have these 4 kicks, which just create part of a riser. But then if I'm looking at this specifically, we have these kicks. And the kicks are EQ'd down, so they're a bit more subdued, and they've got some reverb on them, so that they just fill out the track underneath. Usually I wouldn't put reverb on a kick drum, but it sounds right. I layered 2 snares. One snare sounds like this, like kind of like a really short trap snare. The other sounds like this. Just kind of like a more live snare together with the kick. Added to that sub. I've got some synth layers up here, but the most important thing is that it didn't need much to start sounding really good and really full. I've got a smooth pad, bass, and the kicks. And that's like most of the sound right there. But if I add in all of the layers and the vocal, there are a few things going on there. So let's break them down bit by bit. The first is this sort of like sort of Moog stab to add to the bass line. It just sounds like this. I created it on here, just a 3x oscillator, and I brought the decay time down. I'll add this in the description if anyone has this, but it's just to accent this bass line, to make it have a bit of like a stab at the start. And I have a gentle delay on it, as you can probably hear, that just pings from side to side. Here's the settings here. The most important thing is this sort of smooth pad that fills out these chords. If I just play it here. It's just this on Serum. This is a patch that took me quite a while to create. I made some custom wavetables, and I really tried to make it sound as analog as possible. You know, obviously it's a very digital synthesizer, but I tried to give it that sort of vibe. I'll include this in the description, and you can sort of just decompose it at your leisure. There's all sorts of stuff going on, but the most important thing here was the wavetable where it started, even without any of the effects. It's just a really nice wavetable to start with. So that fills out most of the sound. And then in the sort of low end, but there is a higher pad, which I created on this Arturia Jupiter synth. it does sound good. It kind of fills out the frequency spectrum a little bit. And then at the top, there's these two leads, because you'll notice in his track that there's these other synths just come in to play just one or two notes at a time. And these are just high synths on Serum and then another one on the Jupiter again. And it just, you'll look here and you'll hear the note come in. It just keeps it really interesting. I just want to talk about the chords in the verse and the chorus a little bit more. So I'm going to cut to an overhead camera and play a little bit of piano and talk about these chords and melodies and why they work, because I think they're really, really beautiful. So I want to talk about the chords again, just sort of the beautiful way that they're voiced. So the first chord is that A sharp minor, moving on to the G sharp and F sharp. But what I wanted to show was that the regular sort of A sharp minor triad would just give you these notes. And if I play that, you can hear that it really sort of jams on itself because there's all these low notes together. So just a kind of a beautiful way to voice that is to take this middle note, play it an octave higher, play the A sharp, play it an octave higher, and you get, instead of just sort of a basic triad, it is the same chord, it's just voiced differently. And again with that guitar, instead of the guitar playing every note, it just plays. Which leaves space for all the other stuff. And then in the chorus, we go, we still follow the same pattern, but we jump up at the end to that C sharp. And it's just a really beautiful way to do it because it kind of adds this kind of lift in the chorus and then we resolve again. And what I wanted to show was in the chorus and at the end of the song, how the melody leads these chords in a really, really beautiful way. So the first chord starts like this, then the melody goes and it's such a beautiful melody, but it also says a lot about the direction of the chords. You have that first chord, up, a little bit of hope, back down again, up, back down. And it just paces you around the chords. It's not fighting with it. At the end of the song, it sort of does the same thing again, only we start at the bottom. And I'll just sort of play it and you'll see what I mean. The melody and the chords just gel together in this really, really harmonious way. I also like challenging myself a lot to play stuff on the piano like this because I'm not a keys player, I'm not trained, and if I were just reading off the notes, I would just be, using the basic chord inversions like that, and it probably wouldn't sound very pretty, but really challenging myself to play this stuff by ear, first on the guitar, whether it's like figuring out on the guitar and then putting the notes on the piano or the other way around, it really, really helps you grow as a musician and an artist, especially if you're new. Those of you that know music theory and you're super advanced about this stuff, this obviously makes sense to you, but when I started, I didn't know much music theory. I couldn't play the piano at all, and practicing, figuring out where these chords are, it's a really good way to grow as a musician. And once you figure them out on the piano, you can really play them on any instrument. So here's one of our other synths from later on. The really, really gorgeous chords. Anyway, let's get back to the track. Now we're moving on to the second track, which is called See Me, and I'll just refresh you about some of the different parts in the song.
Some days I wake up and I just want you. Some nights I call out.
So that's the sort of intro to the verse. There's a pre-chorus.
Lifelines are difficult for me in my life. This stood, I find you in the light.
parts I really want to look at are the drums and the bass in particular, although you'll be getting all the presets as usual. First thing to note is that the drums have a really sort of consistent pattern throughout the verses and the chorus, but they're filtered down in the verse. So in the verse, they sound a little bit like this. And in the chorus, they open up. One more comparison, verse. And this is just a really good way to carry the energy. It means that you've still got a load of rhythm in the verse because it's a really rhythmical verse, but nothing is like jumping out at you or demanding too much of your attention. Let's dive into the drum processing because it's sort of different from what I would usually do, especially with this huge amount of reverb that you're hearing. So I'm just going to start by turning off the reverb and just looking at the raw sounds that we start with: kick, snare, and hi-hat. I'll look at them in the chorus. Let's just loop around here. If I take a look over here, I have my own kick drum, and I actually have a snare from Decap Drums That Knock. I'll see if I can put this in the description. I'll ask him if that's okay, but this is a paid for one. Really, really nice sample just to start off with. So the samples themselves sound okay, but it needed a lot more vibe. So the kick I just kind of filtered down a little bit so that it wasn't too abrasive. Really not noticeable. The hi-hats have been cleaned up a bit, but it's the snare that really makes all the difference in this groove. Now this was mixed in context of everything else, so it's important to bear that in mind, but I'm going to talk you through the effects first. So the first one is just some EQ. Now this actually makes it sound worse on its own. Really thin. Then there's a delay. Repeater delay could be done with any delay, but this is a personal favorite of mine. Now what this is doing is creating a 16th note delay. So you'll hear it, I'll just probably turn it up a little bit. So it's kind of given the effect that it's being hit more than once, like a really loose kind of snare sound. And then the reverb at the end is this chamber reverb, but I've shortened the decay, so it sounds like a gated reverb, very sort of retro almost. And although the reverb and delay sound is huge, it dies away really quickly, so you get this big whoosh and then it's all gone. If I increase the decay, it lasts a little bit too long. So in context of everything else, let's just play it around and I'll tweak some of those settings. So that's kind of the basis of the drum sound, but there is one more element that I noticed. I really sort of isolated the low end in his track, and I noticed that it was kind of rumbly and just different. It wasn't like a really clean, tight low end like I might be used to mixing myself, but this also made the song really, really good. It made it really sort of organic sounding. So I've sent my drum bus here. In fact, firstly, I should explain the filtering. So the filtering is really simple. I've got all my drums get sent to a drum bus as I show in my template. And then at the verse, these automation clips are just controlling a filter. Now this could be a cutoff filter, a high pass, low pass, an EQ. It just automates so that this filter cuts out all the high and then some of the low frequencies during the verse. And you hear it, it's just so subdued. And then it's opened up again. But this reverb track makes all the difference. So I've just sent my drums from my drum channel to a drum bus here. And I have a huge big reverb, not too long of a decay, 1.5 seconds, 100% wet, no dry signal. And then the EQ just takes off a little bit of the high end of the reverb. I didn't want that. So I kind of keep it a dark reverb. I'm going to turn this on and off in the chorus, and it really just, if you listen to the way the kick sits with the rest of the track, the way the kick interacts with the bass line changes hugely when you have this reverb on there. So I'll play everything together and then I'll kind of solo it. So you may have heard it, I can certainly hear it on these headphones. However, just with the bass and the kick together, the bass and the drums together, definitely gets cleaner when it's removed, but in this case, clean wasn't what we were looking for. As for the hi-hats, which I haven't gone into too much detail on, I wanted to show the piano roll. So there's the occasional roll, but I've played around with the velocities quite a lot to keep them sounding realistic. And what you'll also notice is that if I open this up here, I have played around with the panning an awful lot. So when you play all the drums together, especially in headphones, but hopefully in speakers, you can appreciate that it's a lot more varied and a lot more interesting, sounds a little bit more live than simply leveling off all of those velocities. I'll quickly level them off and show you what I mean. No panning, and all the velocities the same. This bit especially, hey? Is so boring without those changes in velocity and the panning. Moving on to the bass line and the chords. So the chords are a little bit different. I started by figuring them out on piano. Here are the chords if you want to pause. Really simple, beautiful chords. And I've copied those onto some different pads. So I have like that smooth pad from last time. All of these presets are in the description. And then I also created this high atmosphere. I started with a preset airy looping piano and I turned off the signal pulse engine. This is a paid for plugin inside Contact that I've had for several years. And it sounds like this on its own. Just add some texture on top of the piano. So those chords just lay a good foundation for the track, and the bass is where things really get interesting. So the bass grooves with the kick really well. There's this pulse bass, I'll let you hear it on its own. With the drums. And then there's a sub that just sits underneath everything, and that keeps the track almost playful or maybe youthful at the start. This is kind of like playful, energetic. It's a little bit more kind of my style. But let's play all that stuff together.
Some days I wake up and I just want you all around me.
And what I've noticed overall with the mixing is that he tends to actually keep, or the band, they tend to keep the mixes quite like compressed, like all the bass lines, nothing's really jumping out at you. And it means that those vocal decays, like the vocal reverbs and the delays, can really be really spatial, wide, and play with the mix a lot more because there's nothing else really fighting it. That pulse bass, you know, if that was in a house track or something, it would be like just absolutely pumping out of the speakers and just, you know, shaking everything. But here it's quite pegged in, it's quite compressed under the track. So although it is bouncy, it's not 3D, if you know what I mean. It doesn't feel 3D. It feels like kind of like a 2D wall of noise. And you know, some of these decisions might be the opposite of what you want in a particular genre, but in the case of here, it just fits really, really well. There's a chord switch up in the pre-chorus, which I really appreciate. So the chords change to this progression on the piano, and I'll just highlight it here. And again, you've got this descending pattern similar to In Time. I really like when he does this, it just plays with your emotions a lot. He has some gorgeous risers, and then it launches into the chorus. So this is layers and layers and layers of synths trying to make it as analog as possible. I mean, the first thing is that those drums open up, obviously, and the sub gets a little bit louder, and the pulse bass gets a little bit louder. That carries most of the track. Now, once I add in this kind of smooth pad, you've really got most of the sound. With a vocal on top of that, filling out all the reverbs and delays. That is most of the sound, but there's lots of other little layers that he's hidden in. There's also a few layers I haven't added, like he's got another guitar layer in there as well. So I've just started with the piano underneath the track. And What I want to say about the piano, actually, if I quickly go back to the verse, this is a tip you can use on pianos. Mine's Addictive Keys, but almost all of them do this. Soften up if there's a soft hard option. So soften up on a track like this, and then lower the velocity. So in your piano roll, lower the velocity and then increase the volume afterwards. It makes it really soft. If you just strike the piano with all maximum velocity, that's not really how anyone plays it. If you play nice and softly, smoothly, it just makes it so mellow. That's something that luckily we figured out quite quickly with this piano, because we were struggling to get the tones out of it we wanted. But if you lower those MIDI velocities, it all fits in place. The next layer is again that analog pad. It's playing different chords, so it sounds a bit different. You can download that in the description. I might put some of this MIDI in the description as well. Then I have the trusty Jupiter patch playing a higher section. On top of that, same chords, just higher register. It's just a factory preset, Jupiter 8, factory 35, kind of like these saw waves. Then there's an ARP that plays behind everything. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it sounds to me a little bit like there's a piano layered with another synthesizer that sounds a little bit like, keys, kind of plucky. Because it didn't quite sound so organic to just be a piano, but that sits underneath everything. Really nice. On top of that, I have some saw waves playing sort of like super squares, super saws. Just sits there, creates even more attention in the high end. Then I have that atmosphere from earlier, wobbling between the speakers. Then at the end, I have these two synth brass leads. Brass here, so one was created with Serum, brassy analog pad in the description, and the other one was created on a Jupiter here. And there's loads and loads of layers in this song. There's so many more than I've created here, but it's kind of the general idea. So let's hear this section here. And it's just really, really gorgeous, lots and lots of layers. And although this song's very different to In Time, you can hear that there's definitely a lot of similar elements in terms of, the importance of the thickness of the bass in the track, the analog nature of the pads, always making sure that that vocal takes the attention. Something I should have shown in the other track is that although the vocal often at times feels very atmospheric with lots of reverb and lots of delay, they've been incredibly careful, or he's been incredibly careful, to pronounce and raise the ends of the words. So the T's, the S's, little bits of breaths in between words, they've been very careful to preserve those, because it's those parts of the words that can often be make or break in figuring out what someone is saying. You'll notice if I play a section, although it's more pronounced in the other song, In Time, the ends of the words, T's and S's, they come through each word. And it's really important, because if you don't have that, you could say the start of the word really well, but it all just turns into sort of a reverb delayed mush, and it's quite difficult for the listener. So although the vocals are like super atmospheric and gorgeous, there's very careful attention paid to how they are sung, not just in the feeling, but also in the style. And I've heard various recordings of them performing live, and he just has a really good vocal tone, like even just into like a basic microphone with some splash of reverb on it. Although there's a lot of crazy vocal processing going on, I think they definitely made sure that the emotion and the style was right from the start. They're definitely not fixing this vocal in the mix. I'm pretty sure that if you turned off all the effects on that vocal, it would still sound pretty good. Anyway, that's pretty much it for these two songs. Thank you so much for watching if you've got this far. As much as possible, I'll put the samples and presets in the description, and please do leave comments for what you'd like to see next. And I hope you have a great day, a great week, and I hope to see you in the next one. Might be about a month before the next episode, but let's see how we go. Bye for now.